and it raises an important challenge, which is the questions around through implementation projects are nearly always, how do we plug in? And very rarely are we asking ourselves the difficult question that we don't necessarily want to have to think about, which is how could we unplug if and when we needed to?
Hello and welcome to the Test Community Network update. My name's Tim Burnett. In this session, we're going to be talking about assessment ecosystems, and we've got a very special guest, Nick Freeman, where we had a big conversation about how the platforms that are out there, how they integrate and they connect, what the benefits are from that process, the difficulties, the challenges, and Nick takes you on a journey based on his experience of how that all works. So really worth sticking around. As ever, if you want to know anything that's shared in today's session, then please go to the testcommunity.network. You can find more information there. For the things that I do, I'm kind of involved in a podcast as well. I'm hoping to have a kind of special one next week with this, but the It Depends podcast I do with Amanda, it's really worth checking that out. Latest episode that we have on there is the test centers versus online proctoring. So it's a really good discussion to have. Now, you have to be very quick on this one. The Beyond Multiple Choice conference is coming up in October, and this deadline for submissions is today. Now, it's at 12 noon BST. I'm sure I don't mind if you want to sneak one in the next couple of hours, but if you want to hear your voice talking about formative, summative, different assessment types on a big global scale, big global platform, then please do check that out and get yourself signed up to that. Also, as the Innovations Conference in March next year, the deadline for the fast pitch is the 15th of November. So please make sure you get your submissions into there. Why not? If you've got an amazing product, show it off. As ever, subscribe to testcommunity.network and you can receive an email through with a summary of all the events and information that I'm sharing as part of today's session. Now I've just hot-footed it from a grade webinar, which is talking about the kind of exploring the benefits of AI options in grading. Grade have got a great platform. They do a little demo as part of the session. And they're actually repeating that webinar live, not recording, so I'm going to be back in there again later on. I'm going to share a quick clip for you from the webinar this morning, and so you can get yourselves signed up and registered for the one that starts at 5 p.m. I think it is BST. Here we go.
So what I mean by that is the same input creates the same output, which we've shown is not what happens with generative AI. So they are at least internally consistent, which is really important. And on the point of explainability, yes, neural networks can be quite difficult to get explainability from, but neural networks aren't the only different types of AI. And even if you do use neural networks, you can use sub-models that look at different features that you are actually looking for within your data sets, and then you can create outcomes based on the results of those sub-models and still be able to create that systematic way of looking at why things are happening.
Sorry, a bit quiet there. I didn't quite realize it was a little bit quiet, but worth checking that out. You can listen at full volume. I'm sure the recording will be available as well. 4th of October, Teachmatic. So these are guys who provide a platform that's used by, I use it at college. It's a really interesting platform. It's got a series of whole host of tools that can do distinct jobs, like create a lesson plan, create multiple choice questions, create assignment structure, create a marking rubric. And it's just tapping into GBT, and it creates these kind of tools for you on the fly. So they're doing a webinar that's coming up on the 4th of October. So check that out. There's the UXDX conference. That's the 9th to the 11th. That's worth having a look at that. Education assessment groups. This is it was going to be on the 9th, but they've moved it to the 10th due to a clash. But this is Dr. Mary Richardson's session. They're really worth attending. Some really very informative activities there. I'm going to share with you the whole host of in-person conference, because we're kind of in that in-person time now, so there aren't as many online events going on. But have a look at these just in case you want to jet yourself off, go and see a particular event, or you want to tap into someone who's attending one of these conferences. There's still time, I imagine, with a lot of these to take part. I'm going to now share the interview I had with Nick, which is going to be talking about the ecosystems in AI. So here's me in conversation with Nick. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're well.
Thank you. Yes, very good. Yourself?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Now we're going to be talking about assessment ecosystems. Do you want to just very briefly kind of introduce yourself to the Test Community Network?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So I'm Nick Freeman. I have experience in supporting and delivering projects across quite a broad part of the education space, including assessment, as well as student information systems, CRM, VLE implementations, those sorts of things. But obviously, assessment has been a key part of that sort of throughout.
Yeah, and I think it's anyone who's kind of working in the space. You're working for an organisation that's delivering qualifications. You don't just have one platform, do you? You have multiple pieces of technology that you've got to kind of string together in that space. Can you just, could you give us a kind of an idea as to what that ecosystem looks like for an organisation, or could look like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's going to be very different for different organisations depending on a lot of things like sort of background and how long they've been perhaps in the e-assessment space, whether they're new to the e-assessment space. My particular experience is with an organisation where we had a really long and successful and rich history of in-house system development. And that included anything from student information systems through to all the way through to item bank and exam management systems, and we even had our own homegrown e-assessment delivery platform that we used in schools and colleges. What we found over time was that it's very difficult for an organisation with quite a broad sort of range of business models to maintain a purely in-house approach to systems development, particularly as the pace of change of technology has increased over the last 20 years. And so we started to move to a strategy of adopting third-party platforms for particular parts of the business, particularly in areas where we weren't necessarily able to differentiate through in-house system development. So I think we'll find that there's probably a balance within organisations between some systems that might have no in-house systems, but a lot of companies do have a bit of sort of internal technology resource, and then using specialist, hopefully best of breed platforms for specific business purposes. When someone comes along and says, I need a spreadsheet system, you're not going to develop a spreadsheet system, you're going to use Excel. And so a lot of it comes down to what's the best platform to achieve the outcomes that I'm looking for. And then within that, you've then got to have those systems talking to each other so that your data is flowing effectively and you can achieve deliver your processes and outcomes.
Yeah, and it's been a kind of age-old question, hasn't it? Kind of the build or buy question, really, hasn't it?
And it can be quite cyclical. And the correct answer today won't necessarily be the correct answer 5-10 years from now, as organisations change and the market changes as well.
Yeah, so this was an interesting observation I heard on a podcast recently about so these enterprise AI systems that are being set up now for organisations, and the organisations are really concerned about their data. Because that's obviously a big part of the actual platform itself, and how they're the plugs, aren't they? The data is that's flowing around is probably the most important. And we get into this phase where we went through this cloud phase, didn't we? Where everyone was migrating or saw that they migrated to cloud. But now there seems to be, so this guy on this podcast, they provide AI kind of large language model systems for organizations, enterprise grade ones. And what they're finding is they have to install these on local networks at the organizations because they don't want their data being shared out there. So it's kind of, it's never going to be the right, there's no answer, is there, to, should you build it yourself or buy it?
No, absolutely. Someone once asked me what is the right CRM system, and I think my answer took about 20 minutes, but it could be boiled down to it depends on so many different sort of factors, and the same would be the case in other business areas, including the assessment platform. What's right for one organization's needs won't necessarily be right for the next organization's needs. And it's interesting, you point about sort of people are installing these platforms on internal networks. As you say, that's everything was cloud. But the question to my mind was always, okay, but why?
Yeah.
I'm not doing it because cloud is new, but is that what is the tangible business benefit that's being delivered from it? And we had quite a big internal sort of network infrastructure, which continued to work for us for certain systems, and sort of with cloud adoption in the right place where there were tangible benefits.
Yeah, and I think trust would be a big factor in that process. So, what kind of business and technical challenges then have you kind of encountered in your lifespan of assessment ecosystems?
I think in terms of technical challenges, a lot of it comes down to the API that's available with the system that you're integrating with.
And for anyone not listening to who doesn't know what APIs are, could you explain that one?
I'm hoping I'm going to get this right, because it'll be embarrassing if I get it wrong. I believe it's Application Programmer Interface. Yeah. Essentially, it is a tool which you can use to interface with a system without actually having to use a click screen or a user interface like that. So essentially, you can pass data into it, you can get data from it, and you can do that in both directions with to integrate between systems. It's the part of the tool that allows two different systems to talk to each other and exchange data. And one thing, the biggest lesson I've learned over the years about APIs is they're not all created equal, and there are some APIs that are fully sort of comprehensive and cover pretty much anything, any part of the data that you might need to get to. Anything you can achieve through the user interface, you can replicate through the API, and they can be sort of incredibly well documented, through to the other end where you've got someone will tell you, yes, absolutely, we've got an API in the system, but when you dig into it, you find there are really kind of big chunks of the data set that aren't surfaced through the API. You can't access, and lots of danger of getting into a point where there are processes you hoped or expected that you would be able to automate, that you have limited options to do that because you can't, because you can only use that and interact with that data directly through the screen rather than through the API. So I think that's certainly the most significant technical challenge. There are others. If you take something like single sign-on, that can be a massive sort of barrier to adoption if you don't have single sign-on, for staff in terms of adoption of using the system and using it effectively, but also in terms of students, customers. People don't expect to be able to have to log in multiple times to achieve what they need to achieve with a single organization. On the business side, I think a lot of it, one challenge I've found is, in a way, it relates a little bit back to that people have perhaps have sort of certain expectations that a system will do what they want it to do, but specifically in the way that they're used to doing it.
Yeah.
And what you actually find is that the outcomes can be achieved, but not necessarily in the same way. And obviously, what you're not looking to do is introduce additional or more cumbersome processes. But I think even sometimes you find actually there's a process that can be improved or streamlined, but if it's not what people are used to doing, and it's not the way they do it sort of through muscle memory, there's quite a journey to take people on. So if you take a step back and really consider what's the outcome that you're looking for, we're achieving the outcome, just not in the same way that they were necessarily used to doing it. So getting people to go on that journey and really kind of engage and understand why we're doing it and what the outcome that we are achieving is able to deliver the outcomes that we're looking for, not necessarily in the way they're used to.
I think there was a great example that I heard from someone. They were talking about that kind of expectations and managing those expectations, and it was someone actually was working similarly in a way of your kind of side and your kind of past history of working on that side of the awarding organisation of managing that process. And she was saying it's like moving house. And you can't expect your dining table to fit in the same, in the dining room or in the space within that new house. There is a degree of compromise that you're going to have to make. Not all your furniture will make that transition successfully, or is needed, is it, as part of that experience? And I think
remember that one.
Yeah, no, it's quite good, isn't it? The other thing I think it's worth just mentioning was, the kind of expectations of the API. So there's obviously the bulk opportunity where data goes through in bulks, kind of like at midnight or something like that, isn't there? And then there's that drip thread process. And within there, you've got triggers and events, haven't you? So there's the, what is the starting point for that data? So, new email received or new record on a database. And then there's the event side on the other side. So what can it actually do with that data? So there's those questions, aren't they? And then there's the actual fields themselves, isn't it? And the formats that get passed around.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a range of different things. The way I tend to describe it is you're having sometimes to put sort of square-shaped data into round-shaped holes, and you have to. There's inevitably going to be a reasonable amount of data transformation that has to happen in getting a data item from one system into another, or in the other direction. I think with regards to the how often you're integrating the data, I think you've got to ask yourself some very kind of sort of challenging questions around that. Do I need this data to be live, integrated on a live basis, real time? What's the business case? What's the business process that would support? And what could I not achieve what would I not be able to achieve if that wasn't the case? I think, for example, you might find you want results coming through as real time as possible, so that you can provide immediate support to students around sort of research advice, that sort of thing. But perhaps when it comes down to the more statistical sort of data, and you maybe want to start getting into the details of item performance and exam performance more generally, maybe you only need that coming through sort of once a day, once a week, maybe, or even to the point where you might say, do I need this data coming out of the main system itself? Can I achieve the processes and the outcomes that I need within the system, just leaving some of the data there? It's very easy to get kind of caught up in, well, we're going to need to get all of the data transferred, and we're going to have to do all of this sort of detailed mapping of data items, and all the rules are different. Another example was, I don't think it was an assessment system, but another system where we had one system had the rule that email must be unique to an individual, unique within the system, and another that did allow for the same email to appear on more than one record. And suddenly you're into a whole world of complexity. And well, what are our rules around that between the two systems?
Yeah. And so what kind of questions then would you kind of, an organization looking at setting up their kind of API or, setting up that process, what kind of questions do you think they should be asking along that journey? I know we could have covered a few there, but is there any kind of additional ones?
Certainly the questions around real-time integration and versus perhaps more regular sort of data updates. I think you need to get an understanding of what's your technical team's knowledge and understanding of the API technology, because they're not always built. I think REST API is probably the most kind of commonly used, but there are other solutions that are still out there being used. Is your technical team definitely kind of ready and able to pick that up, or will they need to undergo some sort of further training, and also I guess getting into that real granular level of what do you need and when do you need it and where do you need it to achieve the process, because ultimately there's a cost implication to more regular sort of high volume integration, and you really need to be able to justify that. I mean, questions, I guess, more from that you might sort of put to a supplier are going to be much more around, really interrogating that API, and when their business development manager assures you that there's an API, and it's like, well, that's fine, show me, or actually work with them to map out some of your example processes and data exchanges that you expect to happen to validate that you can definitely achieve what you want to be able to achieve.
I mean, a bit of a left field question for you here, but in your kind of experience, when people come in to kind of pitch their technology solutions to you and things like that, how often have they spent on APIs compared with showing the UI? Do you think that sometimes people tend to draw themselves to showing you the wonderful, fresh, beautiful, user interface experience, and then kind of leave that because they think nobody in the room is going to be interested in this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost analogous to when you're building a new website, and you can try to talk at great length and get people to engage in sort of what they want in terms of need, in terms of functionality, and at the end of the day, all the questions around the shade of whether it's the right shade of blue, and the user interface is something tangible that people can engage with, and the focus very much, and you can click around and see it. I can understand why there is a focus on the user interface sort of from a business development perspective, because actually the API side of things can be quite abstract, and you're not necessarily talking to the API people at that stage. And I think that's quite important. That's a very important sort of lesson, is to have your sort of technical experts early in that tender process, so that they can start asking those kind of challenging or more probing questions around that sort of API and integration piece that you might not be able to ask as a business sort of focused member of staff.
Because I suppose the APIs, they save, because they're automation and they're data kind of connections, they're saving you time and money, aren't they, in that kind of process?
Absolutely.
And when you look at the UI, yes, it might take a few clicks to do something or something like that. But if you've not making the most of the API opportunity, because when you've taken on board the platform and you find that you don't have the technological resource to actually do it properly, or they don't work properly, or there's no your for whatever reason your APIs, maybe legacy ones, don't talk to their modern ones, that can be a kind of huge downside for that journey, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And automation is an increasing or an essential part of the conversation. We're not going to be adopting new systems just so that we can continue manually inputting and moving data around in order to achieve our outcomes. We need not the automation. Yeah, if you're not implementing a new system and automating at least part of your processes, there are some serious questions as to why you're doing it. What are the benefits that you're delivering? So yes, I think it's even if it's a case of mapping out or getting an understanding of, even in the early days, or what percentage roughly of what I can do through the interface could I achieve through the API, and that's almost a good starting point, because you'll get a feel for whether or not that's going to be viable.
Yeah, and the last question for you, I suppose, kind of legacy. Obviously, organisations have got legacy systems and setups, and they might be put off the idea of taking on board a new supplier or branching out because of that legacy process. Should that be a barrier to them? And if it shouldn't, what kind of advice would you give to someone in that situation?
I would say that yes, it shouldn't be a barrier. It doesn't necessarily mean to say that it will be easy, because the legacy system may be sort of highly limited in what it can do in terms of sort of integration. I mean, my personal experience with an in-house system, we had the advantage that essentially we could build our own API and add to it as we needed to integrate with new systems. I think, I guess, the other thing to point out is it's okay to have legacy systems. There are reasons that these systems have stood the test of time and are still in use. I think the challenge will be if it's your first time that you've done a serious piece of integration work with that system, then the advice is going to have to be take a step back and really get to know and understand what are the possibilities in terms of integrating with that legacy system. Get your technical team on board as early as possible, and really challenge them on how can we surface the data that we need to? Can we create triggers that we need to in order to automate these processes? Because you could get a third-party system with the best API in the world, but if you can't get it into and out of your legacy system, then that's going to be the challenge. And a lot of that's a whole new world of kind of platform selection, which will depend again on things like in terms of API or integration platform selection that you're going to build into your legacy system. Try and do it in such a way that leans into kind of the skills and knowledge within your technical team where possible. Obviously, there's a whole raft of different API platforms out there. You need to be working with one that your technical team can support long term.
I suppose the definition of a good success scenario, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is the ability to plug in easily and then also unplug easily. Would you say that would be a kind of a good definition for a success?
It's a very good definition for a success, and it raises an important challenge, which is the questions around through implementation projects are nearly always how do we plug in, and very rarely we are asking ourselves the difficult question that we don't necessarily want to have to think about, which is how could we unplug if and when we needed to. It's another important question in terms of and comes almost full circle to the early part of our conversation around data ownership and if you're implementing cloud systems. Well, if that contract or license expires, what can you do with that data in terms of sort of ownership of it sort of longer term and maintaining access and maintaining its integrity?
Yeah, data is going to be that's the big thing at the moment now, isn't it? It's like you don't want people training their large language models and things like that without your permission, and it's that trust aspect, isn't it?
Absolutely,
part of that process.
Certainly.
Well, I found that absolutely fascinating. I hope the listeners did as well. Thank you very much. I hope you found it fascinating as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really good to kind of hear your first-hand insights really from the process, which I really appreciate. So I'm sure if people want to find you and hunt you out, they can find you on LinkedIn. I'll include your address in the notes. But thank you very much, Nick, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tim.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Nick. That was really, really interesting. So, as ever, if you want any more information, you can always go to the Community.Network website. So the address is there. And we look forward to having more guests on over the next few weeks. It's going to be a bit of a turbulent time because we've got conferences, got the EATP conference going on in Berlin. That's going to be at the end of October. We've got the Beyond Multiple Choice conference taking place in 2 weeks' time, I think it is. So lots going on at the moment, and I'm at a couple of events next week as well. So turbulent time, but it's going to be a fun time. So thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.